All right, everybody, welcome to week 3, chapter 3 of Comm 1017 Intro to Communication Studies. Now, today's lesson is one of my favorite lessons in the whole textbook because it serves as an important reminder to all of us, especially me, that communication is about more than just the role of the sender. The truth is that we are naturally self-centered, and when we begin to think about communication or about becoming better communicators, we start by imagining ourselves as better speakers or better writers. And we naturally think that good communication revolves around the sender. However, this chapter serves to remind us that the goal of the receiver is absolutely critical to the process of communication. Some have even gone so far as to argue that if you are communicating but no one is listening, then communication has not happened. Indeed, the sender-receiver model of communication, which we discussed last week and which is the most prevalent model of communication, is built around the fact that when a message is encoded on one end, in order for it to be successfully transmitted, it has to be decoded on the other end. The receiver is a vital element to the success of any communication event. So today we're going to be talking about listening. Listening is an incredibly important yet often forgotten element of communication. Yet despite its importance, most of us are poor listeners. Even your teacher is a poor listener, and I know better. Even though I know better, I still catch myself not listening as well as I know I should. This chapter is all about becoming a better listener, and I promise you there are things here that you personally need to improve on. So tune in because this is a vitally important topic. First, let's define listening. Listening can be defined as the process of receiving constructed meaning from and responding to spoken and or nonverbal messages. So the process of receiving and constructing meaning from and responding to spoken or nonverbal messages. You'll see several components there: receiving, constructing meaning, and responding. Listening is a complex, multi-step process. There are really 5 elements, and we'll give each of them an in-depth look during this lecture. But for now, let me just give you the brief list. First, attention. Paying attention to the message is a part of listening. Interpretation. Giving meaning to the message is a part of listening. What does the message mean? Evaluation. Evaluating the accuracy of our interpretation is a part of listening. Does my interpretation make sense? That makes me a better listener. 4, responding, providing some kind of response to the message. And 5, message storage, or storing the message for future use. Now, before we get into that process, I need first to point out that listening and hearing are not the same thing. Hearing is a physiological process. It is what occurs when sound waves impact our eardrums and are translated into electrical impulses that will be processed by our brains. That is a physical process. Listening, however, is a social cognitive process. When we listen, we assign importance to what we are hearing, we pay attention to what we are hearing, and we endeavor to give meaning to what we are hearing. Listening involves meaning, and meaning comes from more than just what our auditory systems pick up. Meaning can come from a lot of different places. It comes from your combined life experience. It comes from your shared understanding of the language that the sender is using to communicate to you with, or even your interpretation of any innuendo or insider meaning or inside joke or something that that may not be readily obvious to just any observer, but is encoded in the message specifically for you. You have to listen to pick up on those things. It's not enough just to hear. Listening also has to do with interpreting, not just what was said, but how it was said. Inflections and tones change or emphasize meanings. And to pick up on that, you have to be attentive. You have to be listening. Finally, listening can involve the interpretation of nonverbal cues that exist completely outside of the realm of hearing. A speaker may say one thing with their mouth and a different thing with their facial expression. And they may be meaning to communicate the meaning hidden in their facial expression. They may say, "Well, I'm so excited about that." And what they're saying and the way their body posture reflects are two different things. And you have to be an attentive listener to pick up on the fact that, they're not very excited about that. Whoopee! That sounds excited. But the body posture, the motion, all of that gives you the indication that it's really not that big of a deal to me. Now, in our day and age, much of our communication occurs via electronic media. And while one might argue that text messaging and instant messaging and direct messaging and all those different avenues is more reading than it is listening, all the principles that apply to the accurate reception of spoken messages also apply to the accurate reception of electronic messages. You still have to listen, and listening is still a multi-dimensional event. You may not realize it, but you spend more time listening than you do engaging in any other aspect of communication. One would think that with so much practice, we would become very good at it. However, most of us have very poor listening skills. For instance, have you ever missed an important point in class because your mind wandered off and you were somewhere else? Have you ever misinterpreted a message because you ignored or completely missed the nonverbal modifiers that were intended to impact the meaning of the message? Listening takes skill and mental effort. And unfortunately, most of us had not been trained in that skill. Because of that, we often fail when it comes to listening, or at least I do. Just ask my wife. The problem is that there is a gap between our ability and our performance, a gap between what we can do and what we actually do as listeners. This gap is partly due to our cultural values. We value speaking more than we value listening. We put a lot of value on self-expression. However, we have neglected to value the art of listening. Think about it. We offer several classes on public speaking. A gen ed class every fall on introduction to communication skills. Every incoming freshman takes it. We offer an advanced speech class, an advanced communication skills class, and we're offering that this summer in a summer term. We also offer a variety of classes on preaching, singing, and other forms of communicating. But in all those classes that deal with communication from the speaker end of the spectrum, from the sender end of the spectrum, there is not a single class in the course catalog on listening. There's not a single class that solely deals with the receiver end of that spectrum. It's not a class on being a good listener to good preaching. There's not a class on being a good listener to good music. There's not a class on how to listen to other people as they tell you about themselves. That's one of those things that we just expect you to figure out for yourself. It's kind of like the story, and this may not have happened to y'all, but it was more common in my generation. Dad takes you out to the river and he throws you in the deep end and tells you to learn how to swim. You're going to figure out how to swim because it becomes absolutely necessary. And that's kind of the way our culture treats listening. We just kind of throw you in the deep end of the pool and say, there you go, learn to do it. Now, despite the lack of emphasis that we tend to place on it, listening is an essential communication skill. First of all, good listening enhances job performance. Employers are quick to tell you that the number one trait that they're looking for in new hires is good communication skills. But the truth is that what they're really looking for is someone with good listening skills. Listening to hear what is expected of you enables you to succeed on your job. Listening is also essential in creating and maintaining relationships. If you want folks to like you, learn to become a good listener. Because when folks find someone who will actually listen to them, there is an automatic sense of liking that develops. Why? Because we're all a little self-centered and we all like to be the center of someone else's attention. And we like somebody who listens to us. With that in mind, then, let's talk about the 5 steps of listening. The first step in listening is attention. Now, I'm going to define it according to the book. Attention is the process of selectively focusing on certain events in the environment. The unspoken truth in this definition is that you will hear far more than you're able to listen to. Remember, hearing is something we have no control over. Listening is something that we have to tune ourselves to. We have to become attentive to it. And we hear more than we can actually listen to. We don't have the ability to choose what we hear. We hear everything around us. But we are selective about what we actually listen to. That is a cognitive process. Now, attention can be voluntary, but it can also be involuntary. Voluntary attention occurs when an individual willfully focuses on a particular stimuli. For example, you're in a crowded room with lots of ambient noise, but you shut all of that out and listen to the person sitting at the table with you. Involuntary attention occurs, however, when the intrinsic properties of a stimulus capture your interest and your attention. It's beyond your control. For example, during that same conversation, a familiar jingle comes over the sound system in the restaurant, and all of a sudden your attention is broken and you involuntarily shift your focus to the sound system. That's called a distraction. And that's what happens. You go from being an attentive listener to an inattentive listener. In the blink of an eye, you become distracted. Now, there are ways to improve attention and avoid being distracted. First of all, you have to begin by recognizing how easy it is to become distracted. Go ahead and acknowledge how easily you can be distracted and make up your mind, this conversation matters and I'm going to stay focused on what really matters, or this lecture or this message or whatever it is, this communication event that I'm involved in. I've got to know it's easy for me to get distracted and I need to pay attention. This is important to me. Attention improves whenever you approach a communication event with a clear purpose in mind. Why are you listening? If you're listening to a lecture, remind yourself that this is all about paying attention to essential details, because what's in the lecture is going to appear on the test. And there is a test next week that covers the first 3 lectures and the first 3 chapters of your book. So what you hear in the lecture is important to you because it's going to appear on the test. If you're listening to your best friend, you remind yourself that you're listening because whatever they have to say is important to you. If you're listening to your date, you remind yourself that you're listening for their benefit as much as your own. Remember, people like it when someone shows genuine interest in the things that matter to them. When you listen, they like you more. Good listeners distinguish between essential and non-essential information. You have to learn to tell the difference between what is essential and what is not. When you're listening to a lecture, professors tend to say things more than once or in more than one way. Learning When that happens, that means that is essential and that you need to be paying attention. That should cue you in. Hey, this is material. It's appeared in lecture 1 and it's appeared in lecture 3. It's probably going to be on the test that's going to cover, all 3 chapters. So you need to learn when it's okay to when you must pay attention, and when it's okay not to pay attention. Now, when you're listening to your date, remember this: everything they're saying is essential. Don't ever get caught tuning them out. This goes for spouses as well. Everything they say matters. Don't ever get caught phasing that out and thinking about something. It never ends well. Effective listening involves being sensitive to context. How something is said is often important in interpreting what it means. This is where listening with half an ear gets us into trouble. Context matters. And in order to pick up on important contextual clues, you have to be paying attention. Finally, don't dismiss a message or a speaker before you hear them out. If you decide before the conversation starts that it is not important to you, then you'll never pay enough attention to truly listen to what is being said, and you may miss something that was important to you. The second step in listening is interpretation. To process information, we use mental guidelines called schemata. I'm going to define that according to the book. They are internal representations of objects and sequences of action. We have schema for physical objects, types of people, personality traits, relationships, and sequences of action. The 3 most important schema for this discussion are person prototypes, personal constructs, and scripts. Let's talk about each of those. Person prototypes are what allow us to identify and assign people to categories by comparing them to idealized representations that we have already formed in our mind. For example, deciding that Dr. Jones is a typical professor, or that Craig is a typical music manager. We have some type of typical image of what a professor is or what a music major is like, and we assign them to that category. We have personal schema that we use to identify what a typical type of person is. These prototypes give us a quick take on others, but the problem is they ignore individual details and encourage stereotypes. When we rely on these schema, especially these person prototypes, we are prone to fall into stereotypical prototypes. Another type of schema that we use are personal constructs, and these are the specific characteristics that we notice and use to judge those around us. They are the descriptors we use to determine what an individual is like. They arise from our own experience, and they are colored by our own characteristics. They make perception more efficient, but they can also be inaccurate and unfair. For example, someone who chronically distrusts others may be prone to ascribe constructs like manipulative, sneaky, and selfish to folks who don't deserve it. They don't belong in those categories. And then finally, there are scripts. Scripts are schemata that guide action. They tell us what to do in a given situation. They involve pre-scripted sequences of action and reaction. They can give us confidence because they help us to know what comes next in a given situation. However, they can also cause us to hear and see what we expect to hear and see rather than what actually occurs. You ever been in that place where the person's counting down? It's a ready, set, go. Ready, set. When they get to go, they say something entirely different, and half the people jump, and the other half are sitting there waiting for the word go. It's because we're using a scheme, a script, to process this, and we know that after ready, set comes go, and at the first syllable, we're going. And so that's the way a script operates. It's a pre-scripted sequence of action and reaction. But if we're not paying attention, a script can cause us to move in a way that is inappropriate, to make an interpretation or hear or see what we think we hear and see, not what we actually hear and see. Now, all schemata have embedded within them schematic default options. These are details that are supplied when actual information is missing. And when we rely too much on old familiar schemata, then we tend to act mindlessly. And sometimes acting mindlessly saves time and energy. At other times, though, we need to take control of a process in a more mindful way. I pull up and I order my coffee at Starbucks, or around here it's a joint called Shadrack's. And if I order my coffee at Shadrack's, I pull up and I don't really think a whole lot about it. I kind of give my order and they may ask me a question. I may mindlessly answer it. It's a script. I know exactly what's coming and what I need to say. One of these days they're going to ask me an unexpected question and I'm going to give the wrong answer because I'm operating in the realm of that script. Then there are other times, though, that I need to be more attentive. I can't afford to be in the script. I have to pay attention when I'm bargaining, trying to buy a car or something like that. Then I have to be very attentive to everything that's being said. Finally, let's discuss some ways that we can improve in the area of interpretation. First of all, it's important to recognize how easy it is for us to make or arrive at false interpretations. When we listen to new information, we should relate it to and test it against what we already know. We should go back and evaluate and look at it and make sure that it matches up with the schemes that we have in our mind. That will help us with accurate interpretation. But as I've already stressed, you have to be mindful of the pitfalls that can come along with that. Here's the thing, and if you don't get anything else out of this lecture, get what I'm about to say. We can process much quicker than we can speak. As a matter of fact, we process information, the better way to say it is faster than we hear it. The normal rate of speaking is 150 words per minute. So if you're in a conversation, the person talking to you is speaking at a rate somewhere around 100 to 150 words per minute. The problem is that you and I are capable of processing up to 300 words per minute. Just for instance, I don't know if you listen to YouTube videos or if you do audiobooks or podcasts, but all of those venues allow you to increase the speed at which you're receiving the message. The next time you're listening to one of those auditory, whatever it is, a book or a podcast or watching a video, try increasing the speed to 1.5. What you're going to find out is you can process just about, you won't miss anything at 1.5 speed. It just happens faster. It condenses the amount of time it takes. It also condenses the amount of time you have to think about it. So if it's a really cognitively demanding topic, it may not work as well for you. But I listen to almost everything I listen to on either 1.5 or 2 times speed, depending on the natural speed of the person doing the speaking. Kick it up to 2 times. You'll discover that there are certain individuals or certain videos or certain audio book readers where you can listen to them on double the speed and still comprehend everything they're saying. Now, the thing what that means is that when we're listening, a good part of our cognitive ability is sitting in neutral. It's not doing anything. And the temptation is to begin to think about something else or to begin to formulate our response to what we're hearing while we're still listening. How many have been guilty of that? Everybody raise your hand. We're all guilty of that. You're right in the middle of the conversation. You start formulating your response to what was just said, and you ultimately, at first, you can dual process. You can hear and think. But ultimately, what you're thinking about becomes more important to you than what you're hearing, and you phase out the person, and they finally finish speaking, and you begin to respond to something they said 5 minutes ago, and they've already well past that, and they're looking at you like, are you an idiot? But you have completely changed the way you're processing what they're saying because you're turned your mental power to formulating your response. In case you haven't gotten it yet, this is bad listening. It leads to distractions. It leads to misinterpretations. It leads you to completely mistake what you're hearing or to respond to something that's completely inappropriate for the moment. Instead of doing that, you should focus on the message and understanding what you are hearing. There's plenty of time and plenty of processing power to formulate your response when it's your turn to speak. One final way to improve your ability to interpret what you're listening to is through what is called a perception check. This is what happens when you restate back to the speaker what you think they are saying. I do this sometimes with my wife. She's given me a list of instructions, and she said, "Did you get that?" And I restate what I believe the instructions are. Because here's the thing, if I've got the instructions wrong, that's important, and I need to know it now, not when I've gone and done what I thought I was supposed to do. It helps avoid misunderstanding, and it's an important element to make sure that you're interpreting what you're hearing correctly. It's called a perception check. It'll come up again a little bit later in this lecture. A third step in listening is evaluation. Part of being a good listener is knowing what to listen to, what to receive, and what to reject, what to believe, and what to question. The first step in listening critically is being able to determine the purpose of the message. Knowing what a speaker is trying to accomplish puts you in a much better place to evaluate the message that you are receiving and interpreting. You have to be able to judge the quality of the message. It's important to demand good evidence and to consider the trustworthiness and expertise of the speaker. If you're going to evaluate your interpretation and you're evaluating the message, you need to expect your speaker to be credible, trustworthy, and give you good evidence so that you can put faith in what you've heard. You also need to be able to identify loaded language, which is emotionally charged language. Certain kinds of language trigger certain kinds of emotional responses. It's psychological. It just happens that way. And speakers can utilize this loaded language to generate an automatic response in us. I'm doing a class this semester on persuasion, and we're talking a lot about persuasion triggers. And there are certain psychological triggers that a salesperson can initiate in you that generate an automatic response. Loaded language is the same kind of thing. It's a trigger. It generates an automatic response, but your automatic response may not be the best response for you. You need to be aware when a speaker is trying to manipulate you, trying to coerce you through the use of loaded language. Finally, in relation to electronic communications, any information gathered from an online source should be examined critically. For instance, anybody can edit Wikipedia. Do not accept the data presented there as authoritative without checking it against another source. Now, there are several ways that we can improve how we evaluate messages. First of all, always question the adequacy and the accuracy of the message. Second, be sure to distinguish between these three things: descriptions, which are statements of observable facts; inferences, which are personal interpretations of those facts; and evaluations, which are a positive or negative judgment of those facts. Descriptions are factual, but inferences and evaluations are based on opinion, and you need to be able to recognize them for what they are. Facts are authoritative, but inferences and evaluations are not. Finally, be aware of the fact that we all have personal biases. Do not let your bias affect your judgment. A fourth step in listening is responding. When we communicate, we expect to receive an appropriate response. If you pour out your heart to your best friend and all you get in response is a blank stare before they get up and walk out of the room, you'll certainly be disappointed. Likewise, when somebody communicates with you, they're expecting an appropriate response from you. In fact, listeners have an obligation as a part of our social contract to respond to what they're hearing. Responding is a way that you can let the speaker know that you're actually listening. And whenever you do that, that kind of response is called active listening. It can be accomplished in a variety of ways: nodding your head, a sympathetic look, an appropriate verbal response. These are all ways that you can let the sender know that you are receiving and understanding what you're receiving. One way to express empathy is through paraphrasing, which involves repeating in your words what you have just heard. Remember, this is also a type of perception check, and I said it would come up again. When you repeat back to the sender what it is that you're receiving. So when you tell the speaker what it is that you're hearing, or that you're paying attention to and listening to, it helps by letting them know that you are interested in what is being communicated. It doesn't just help you check your understanding. It doesn't just help you make sure you've got it right. It helps them know that they are being heard. Now, there are several ways that you can improve the way that you respond. First of all, listeners should keep in mind that you are always sending a message. This double negative came up in the first lecture, and here it is again. Or maybe it was the second lecture, but here it is again. You cannot not communicate. Now, there goes the double negative. You cannot not communicate. Even as you are listening, your facial expressions and your body posture are communicating your attentiveness or lack thereof. You're sending a message even when you don't think you're sending a message. It's important then to think about how your reaction will be seen by the sender. When we're fixated on formulating our response before the sender even finishes sending the message, we send a signal through our nonverbal cues that we really aren't interested in what else they have to say. They can pick it up. They pick up on the fact that you've stopped listening. And what you're doing is formulating your response. But what you're communicating is, I really don't care about anything else you have to say. I only care about my response. Finally, being a good listener means that you respond to what is not said as well as what is said. Sometimes what is left unsaid infers far more than what was actually said. If you're not paying attention, then you're going to miss those important clues. Remember, sometimes the facial expression says something entirely different than the words saying. If all you're doing is listening with half an ear, you'll never pick up on the facial expression, which completely changed the meaning of the message. The fifth step in listening is message storage and retrieval. No matter how careful you are about listening, if you can't remember the message, then you have failed to really listen. First of all, false memories are more common than most of us realize. Do you remember playing the whisper game, where a message was passed through a human chain, where each person communicated what they heard in a whisper to the next person in line? At the end of the line, the message will have changed in some significant way. It will be different than it was when it started. The chain definitely breaks down. However, there is no single point in the chain where the breakdown is intentional. Each person has communicated what they think they heard. Their immediate memory of the communication is faulty. Their immediate interpretation of the communication is faulty. They have misinterpreted and, in turn, miscommunicated. It matters that you remember and that you're able to recall what you heard, so that you're able to first draw on that later, second, communicate that yourself later. All right, there are ways that speakers can help receivers process information by designing messages that are easy to listen to. And part of, again, the bigger focus in communication is on being a better speaker. We recognize that. So let's talk about ways that you as a speaker can help your listener. There are several ways that you can capture their attention. Their voluntary attention can be increased by relating the message content to their needs. People listen voluntarily when you're speaking to their needs. So drive your message, make it personal to your receiver, to your listener, and they'll be more apt to tune into what you're saying. You can also attract involuntary attention by making the message vivid and compelling. Loud, urgent deliveries, like the preacher does on Sunday night, tend to garner attention. However, if the entire message is loud and urgent, like some of us preachers do, then the effect of the loudness and the urgency is greatly diminished. So you got to use these tools. They will garner immediate attention. They will garner involuntary attention. You can be sitting in a room full of people and you feel like you've lost your audience and use one of these elements and immediately capture their attention. The trick is not to overuse it or they begin to tone it out. Another way you can help is you can control the receiver's interpretation by making your message easy to understand. If you're giving someone new information, relate it to old information that is familiar to them. That helps them understand. Help them make a logical connection between what they already know and what you're telling them now. You should also use a clear, organized pattern in a speech or formal message in order to enhance comprehension. When I teach public speaking, and if you take Intro to Communication Skills next semester, that's what you'll get is public speaking. We teach a particular process, and we do that on purpose because it is designed to assist the listener in processing the information. It's not that you have to speak according to a particular method or formula in order to be a successful speaker. You may be real good at speaking off the cuff, but your audience is more likely to follow you, listen to you, hear you, interpret what you're saying correctly, receive it, store it, and remember it if you use a systematic process with clear organization. Finally, by providing opportunities for feedback, you can increase understanding. Remember, we were talking about these perception checks. Give your audience a chance to tell you what they think you're saying, because at that point, if they're not getting what you're saying, it becomes immediately obvious and you're able to respond to it. Now, you can also help them remember your message. One way to accomplish that is through repetition. Repetition leads to retention. So you'll hear speakers, public speakers, preachers, different ones, hit a theme and then repeat the theme over and over and over again. Because repeating the theme puts that theme in the memory of the listener. You can also increase retention by tying your message to an appropriate trigger. For instance, the hospital that my wife works at hired a motivational speaker to come in and talk to their employees. And I'm wrapping up with this, so give me your attention for just a minute. Part of his speech was about being thankful. And he introduced a powerful trigger in order to help his listeners remember that message. He pointed out that yellow is an odd color for a car. And he solicited a pledge from everybody in the audience that every time they saw a yellow car, they would take the time to express what they were thankful for in that moment. Now, when you initially agree to that kind of contract, you think that yellow cars are sure to be a rare occurrence. However, the more you look for yellow cars, the more yellow cars you begin to notice. And every time you see a yellow car, that message is reinforced. We should be thankful. And so it's a powerful and simple trigger. You're driving down the road, all of a sudden a yellow car enters your field of vision, and without even thinking about it, your mind goes, oh, wait a minute, yellow car, automatic response. I'm supposed to tell what I'm thankful for. Go ahead and try it. It's a powerful and simple trigger. Make up your mind right here today that for the rest of this week, Every time you see a yellow car, you'll stop and thank God for something in your life. Try it and see. Before long, you'll gain a fresh attitude of thankfulness and a new appreciation for the power of a simple trigger. With a trigger, you can implant an idea in the mind of your audience and cause them to remember it over and over and over again. You'll never look at a yellow car the same again. You'll have to stop and go, this is what I'm thankful for. And don't forget, you do have a test next week. It will cover chapters 1 through 3. I will give some preeminence to the material I have covered in the lectures. That material, especially definitions, words, concepts, theories, those kind of things are going to be more prevalent on the test than anything else. However, there may be the occasional item that is from the chapter that I didn't discuss in depth in the lecture, or I just kind of glossed over. So you are responsible for the chapter. God bless you. I hope you have a great day.